Ladies and gentlemen, very welcome to this conference about exercising the right to self-determination and the right to decide in 21st century. But first of all, I would like to thank very much the distinguished guests who have accepted to come to speak at this conference. From Catalonia, Carlos Puigdemont, and from New Caledonia, Daniel Goa and Kenneth Clark from Scotland. And this is a great honor to us. No, sorry, Kenneth Gibson. Kenneth Clark was a different one. Not quite the same color. But anyway, it is a great honor for us to have you as guests here today. And we had expected that you would bring the sunshine from New Caledonia and Catalonia to the Faroes. That didn't happen, but on the other hand, you can see which conditions we have to live under in the Faroe Islands. And of course, we will also welcome the chairman of the party, Choelte, the Republican Party in the Faroe Islands, who is organizing this conference, and he will also be the first speaker. But before we get to the first speaker, I can say that we will have a short introduction, which I'm going to make. And it will be Høgni Høydal who will take the floor after that as the first one to open the conference. Then it will be Kenneth Gibson, and then it's Daniel Goa, and then we hope to have room for a small break before Carlos Puigdemont comes onto the scene. And if there will be time left, we will also have a discussion. And there will be possibilities for people also to put forward questions so that we can have a dynamic discussion. I'm going to lead you through this session, but right now I'm going to have a small introduction about the right to self-determination. Oh, sorry. Hand down. Hey, bye. Sorry. We shift-knappen bare. Okay. But this introduction will be made in Faroese. But the distinguished guests from outside have a possibility to follow what this introduction is all about, because the headlines are on the screen. Til 74 år siden I heimastyrsloven var sett I gilde, til 42 år siden vi hadde folkeatkvøv om å skipa Føroyar som fullveldig. Og tøyen I velest eisen kommet til at vi gjør noen middelbiler gjør støvn opp om hvordan det ser ut I det, og hver lei vi skulle halda fram etter. Sjåls avgjøre retter har vært nekk framme I nekkvån tjætjer, og hodtætjer tjåskapelig sjåls avgjøre retter til snur seg om rettene til tjåvån sjålvar at hege avgjør om hvordan det vil skipa seg som sjålstå land, etla som land og gjøre en fralsan sottmala vi andre land, etla og på æramater skipa seg og I samstarve vi andre rujten. Hodtætje sjåls avgjøre retter til verir parster av alt sjåa politikki og I kjalavørnuna fyrra henspartier. Det har vært flere spurningar framme om man skulle flytta noen marsk I Europa. Og amerikanske forsøden Wilson, han leie ta fram hodtætje sjåls avgjøre rett, som følte som bor I omstrutten øtjon, själva kunde säga sån hoksan och göra av hur landamörsene skulle se ut. Att nu Danmark tog öliga väl undervisning här, till den yngste att lima innatter Sönderjylland och I danska rydgen. Och att i grundarlandet var så folk adkvöve hilden och I 1909 menar det var så förslögen 100 år sedan. Och urslitet var att marsche mellan Danmark till var flott sorätter så Sönderjylland atter kom under dansk rei. Hetta var eisne en parster av grundarlanden under sambandsåttmålene mellom Østland og Danmark, som ble gjort for just 100 år siden, og tann såttmålen stedfeste at Østland var skipa som fullveldig ved Felix kongshuset ved Danmark. Det kommer en annen bildja rundt om hetta hodtætje vi sjálvsavgjøre retter, og til rundt om dekolonialisering. Det er en nødjan aktualitet ta I sattna heimskruj enda Du tar var ferdig under at avkolonialisera Tjaland. Og Limalandene I ST, de var 55 I tale ta. De stafeste i SDE-fundar samtykton at man skulle trygga ödlun tjalandon eller non-self-governing territories ratten til a skipa seg som sjálvstøv land eller etter fullgåven folkareisle mannagongton at trygga seg kanskje en ærastøve som vi nevnte i Johannes som en fralsan fellesskap og gamle tjalandene eller det vil si landene som høtte tjalandene de bundet seg til a stola daimon av hesare leine. Hetta var ta grunta og grunnleggjande demokratisk rattende og mannarattende til sjølvi å gjøre av sina framtid. Tjalanda veldene, de mest å ta hverju tjalanda i høtte som fingi hendan ratten, og avkoloniseringen, hun tog diga seg i altrusjonen og i trusjonen. Og tali av suveren og staten, de vaks negv til neste 30 årene. Men Føroyar og Grønland var ikke sett av hendan listan. Det var himvegen Ny Kaledonia. Det var et av London. Og med anna vi støy i tarre samtykkene som ta var gjørst og sættne este samtykkene med anna 1906 trus i alt som var rattet, så var det en folke adkvøva hilden i Ny Kaledonia 23 der, den 4. november, landet skal skipa som en sjølvstøv tjov eller ikke. Jeg kan så si at var det ikke samtykk ta, så var det nødja folke adkvøva, men det var det høyre mer om. Det en tria-bildja rundt om sjálvsavgjøreratten og om a skipa seg som suverent land. Og det en bildja som kommer i læg ta i Sovjetsamveldet dette sunter og ta i Jugoslavia dette sunter. Ta vi kjent i heimsens land ratten til 18 Baltalanden a skipa seg som sjálvstøv og tjauver, vi støy i alt tjauver ratten, og de finner i eisne som limaskap og i esten. Så gjerne ta det bare noen helt få land som i skipa som sjálvstøv land, og nå i 21. øld så tidses det som at Raja hever ho av venta, og hoeren til at man etablerer av landene og vi kjenner ratten til øren tjåven at skipa seg som sjálvstøv land viknaver, for jeg ikke sier at Raja gonger i måten. Det sutja vi med landa i Europa og i Europas samveldene, og vi sutja det eisne i 18. Kina. Og en rastevne i Brussel fyrre vikene så sier et som ombår tjauver og minnenlotar som ikke vidkjenter at de etablerer av landene, de tolka alt tjauva sottmalan tjauskapalian sjálvsavgjere rett sera smalt. Og de vira han bæra til at tjener der egne avmalen som til dømes i Kosovo og Sur-Sudan som var, kan man si, alt tjauva politisk problembøten. Og hette her var med anna katalaner sanna. Så jeg har vært sett så ut alit og at Europa for å telle ta Spania valgte å fære så herlige fram mot det demokratisk valgte katalanskon odviton, så hørtes ikke et kis ur EU. Og i jar svære jeg danske utenriksråden og danska tingmannen Pelle Dragstedt minst trutja fer at i Danmark med vid støvende Katalonia som et spankst innanriksmål og tog har vi unga mening om det. Men hver ta viringen for mannarattenden og grunnleggjande demokratisk rattenden til tjauven som selv vil gjøre av hvordan de vilja skipas. Nå, hadde det ikke. Hva det neste slidene? Han kommet her, fint. Det motsetninger mellom stater og tjauver. Stater som hever sitt omveldig på plass, halda fast på sine marsk, og til argumenterer alltid ut fra jorda og grunnloven. Men de landene som gjerne vilja skipa seg som fullveldig, de argumenterer som regel ut fra de politiske sjånene. Så til kjent og sørst så enda tjadje sjálvsavgjere ratten til tjauven oftast vi, at nasjonalstatene verjar seg ved grunnlovene mot de ødlån røndene flyta marsk, og hine landene må så regna sødja seg politiskan stol innanfra og utanfra og lena seg opp at alt tjava lov, for jeg leggja trust av så de kunne vinna seg ratten til hvordan sjálvi å slippe taka støve til sine egne framtid. Vi gjør Norron, så sin spurningen ikke bare en spurning om jorda, men en stora mån om politisk vilja og viring for grunnleggjande demokratiske ratten til tjauven som vil skipa seg som tjau. Hese tingene kjenner vi deisen etter i Føroyum. Tui mian til dømes føringar iver høver tala fyrir vukkaun utanrujus politiskun heimildun og annars hava tala fyrir øron framborotun okkuna fremma så jeg vil hava større rasarum, så er svære kvarja fyrir verjur Danmark at det kan man ikkje til danska grunnloven løyve du ikkje til den juridiske argumentet som talar imot det. Men ta det så vunnet framalai, så er det tog at det enda vi har blivet en politisk semje av korsen. Førja landstyre boa ifra i en danska rapport til SD i 2006 eller 2006 at Førjar hava fotland sjålsavgjørerett. Og det er sjålvande en tutningamikkel utmelding. Og det er avmetelig stor tutning at vi tar kontantratten. Men dette er en ensøy utmelding til samband danska underrusrahanen, så Danmark omgant vi er kjent for omheimen ratten til Førjun er skipa seg som egna tjå. Hivein så har flere forsvarsrådare sagt at det råkner vi at folketinget for å vira urslidig av en folkeatkvøy i Førjun. Han råkner vi at man for å vira urslidig av en folkeatkvøy i Førjun. Men det er bare en utsøkt fra forsvarsrådaren og ikke en skrivelig avtale i middelen tvær parter. Skulle det da komme til skarpskjeringer med den partene, så kunne Førjar tog ikke råkne vi store stoler i øren London, til svære være bare at dette er et danskt innlandlendes mål, og så sier og tia Ødlheimsens land. Dette er et internt mål for Danmark at ta støve til. Dette var min politiske tolkning, dette er ikke en juridisk professor som svære. Men i det har vi så valgt, i stedet for å føre inn i en mer akademisk diskusjon, å få 4 politikere å si sånne hoksan om retten til sjølve å gjøre av sånne fremtid, og hvordan tar vana land tar å komme vujere frem av fullveldslei. Ødel har de imisk eikjenner, men korsene har de til felaks at det verja og strujast for sjølvsavgjøre retten eisene i 21. alt. Det var Høgne som legger 4, og så gjerne Kenneth Gibson som jeg sier i Janne. Jeg vågner sjåvande at denne her rastagen, hun kan vukka okkara sjånaring og være vid til å sette spurningen om sjølvsavgjøre retten av skrar, om ratten til okkon sjølvun er gjerne av, om vi skulle skipa okkon som sjølvstøva tjå, etla oppa annan mat. Takk fyrir, og så fyrir jeg leta Høgna Høydal og Rydgjørsvann.
Hei, denne brøyteren, altså. Ja. Kom til alt sommål. Takk for at så mange er kommet her til å alltid avhørte rastendene. And to our distinguished guests from abroad, very welcome to the Faroe Islands. We are honored to have you here from New Caledonia, Scotland and Catalonia, and hope we will have a prosperous conference. I will just say some words in Faroese and then I will go over to English. Og altså, jeg er ferdig at Førjøkna sin til førske søvende, leiene fremme som jeg så kjenner vi som er kjøl, så kjenner jeg skal kjøle litt denta, at jeg vet at vi følger ned i imse meninger om bæg om ta søvlige utleggingene, og hvordan vi vil komme videre av frem, så ta mot det her, lett at jeg kunne gjøre meg kjøvann ta i lett at frem. Og det skal jeg gjøre verst vi måtvis åkere utländske gesten. So, ladies and gentlemen, I will try to go briefly through the Faroese case of self-determination and independence. And as I stated in the Faroese, in the Faroe Islands, there is not consensus about the interpretation of history and so on. So this will be my interpretation and my party's interpretation. So just have that in mind when you should interpret what happens in Faroese politics. So the Faroese case of self-determination. I will start with some myths. It is said in our midst that the Faroe Islands were inhabited by Norwegian people that fled from Norwegian kings and Norwegian taxes. And they fled from Norway in boats westwards. Some went to the Faroe Islands, some went to Iceland, according to the myth. We now know perhaps that's not the right historical fact, but that's according to the myths. So they went from Norway. Icelanders claim that they first arrived in the Faroe Islands. All the seasick people went off in the Faroe Islands, while those who wanted to become independent and strong, they went on to Iceland. We don't fully agree we claim that all the Norwegian people tried to find the Faroe Islands, the paradise on earth, but only the best navigators could find these islands, while the rest have to just to go with the tide to Iceland. So that's according to the myths. Today, of course, we see ourselves as a large ocean nation in the middle of the North Atlantic, as New Caledonia is. If we take the Faroe Islands as land and exclusive economic zone, we are actually a large nation. And in our opinion, I think I can speak for every Faroese, we have every possibility to have a prosperous nation here in the middle of the North Atlantic. But we do not agree upon the constitutional issue. And to go briefly through my interpretation of the Faroes' constitutional position, we could claim that the Faroe Islands have always had its own parliament and has been its own judicial entity. We also claim that we have the oldest parliament in the world. I know there are many claims about that, but we have good records for that. And throughout the Viking Ages and into the Middle Ages, the Faroe Islands made agreements with Norwegian kings and were connected to Norway in one way or another. The Danish and the Norwegian formed a union. That's the Faroes' connection to Denmark. When Norway, after the Napoleonic Wars, Norway became a part of a union with Sweden. Iceland, Faroe Islands and Greenland were left together with Denmark. And in my opinion, the history from about 1800 has been a history of where Denmark has its plan to integrate, even assimilate the Faroe Islands into the Danish unitary nation state, both politically, in cultural terms, economical and in administration. And that was what actually also initiated the national movement in the Faroe Islands, first and foremost on the cultural basis that we would have our own language, but also a question of building a modern Faroese nation in Faroese culture and with Faroese political institutions. And that went on to Second World War, which changed everything. We were occupied by Britain, while Denmark, as you know, were occupied by Germany. So after that, there was a whole new question of Faroes' independence. We had practically been independent during the Second World War. So briefly, it resulted in a referendum on independence in 1946. There was a small majority pro-independence, but even though the Home Rule Act was introduced in 1948 without a new referendum, and also in my political interpretation, this was a very special referendum. This was a referendum where you should choose to accept a Danish offer to have some kind of home rule, kind of integration in Denmark, or you should choose full independence. And I think most people thought that this would scare the Faroese people to vote for the first, to integration in Denmark. But there was a small majority, as you see here, 400, there was a small majority pro-independence, and I think that was very crucial for the future of the Faroe Islands. Because with that we also maintained the right to self-determination. In my interpretation, if we had voted for the Danish offer, we would have been integrated into the Danish state after the Second World War. I will come back to that. Today, I think I can speak for everyone in the Faroe Islands that we agree upon that we fulfill all criteria as a people with the right to self-determination, both according to history, language, identity, political institutions, borders, ability to uphold democratic rights, and so on. I also claim that the Faroese people has never accepted or voted pro-integration in the Danish state or pro the Danish constitution. And we also claim that the Faroese people are subject to international law, of course. And Magne mentioned it, the UN Charter and the covenants upon political, economical rights and human rights state very clearly that all peoples have the right of self-determination. By virtue of that right, they can freely determine their political status and freely pursue their economic, social, and cultural development. And all peoples, you know this, may for their own ends freely dispose of their national wealth and so on. And the state parties to the present covenant, including those having responsibility for administration of non-self-governing and trust territories, shall promote the realization. This is stated by my party. There is not consensus about all this in the Faroes, in the whole of Faroes politics. But as Mark mentioned, we have been pressed between international law and Danish law for many years. The Faroes people were never listed on the UN in accordance to decolonization, and never listed on the list of people that has not exercised the right to self-determination. And in my opinion, the referendum in 1946 was actually a vote on integration into the Danish state. I think that Denmark had foreseen what happened in the UN. Magne mentioned that Greenland was in a quite different position. They were actually listed first on the list of peoples that had right to self-determination, but later they went off the list when they were integrated into the Danish constitution without a referendum. So in my opinion, the majority for independence and rejection of the integration of the Danish state has been the basis for the ongoing independence process in the Faroe Islands. But still, as Magne mentioned, Danish constitution is still used as an absolute framework for all Faroese rights, also when we debate with Denmark on the process of independence. They say it has to be done according to the Danish constitution and so on, not according to international law. Well, in my opinion, the power of self-determination is huge, not only in the Faroe Islands. I think it's to say for all parts of the world. In my opinion, the process towards self-determination and independence has been the basis of modernization and development in the Faroe Islands, both cultural, socially, economical, and political. I also believe it has been the basis of responsibility, democracy, and slowly to build our international relations. And I still think it's the basis for the ongoing development of the Faroe Islands as a democratic, modern nation in the world. So I still think that that decision by the Faroes people in 1946, and I could also add when Denmark joined the EU, that we voted to stay outside, I think that has been the basis for our possibilities to still develop this nation as a modern nation of the world today. And just as an example, we can debate if the Faroes are subject to international law, and we have talked about the Carlos a bit, but only in fisheries we have agreements with all our neighbors. We take part in international bodies that administrates some of these huge resources of the North Atlantic, and so on and so on. And I don't think this would have been possible if we hadn't had this process and if we had joined the EU. In the 21st century, there has been some developments in Faroese independence process. In the year 2000, there were negotiations with the Danish government on a treaty of free association. Basically, a kind of a union where we should still have the same king as head of state or queen, and have some rights between Faroes and Danish citizens. But there was no agreement. There was planned a referendum, which was abolished. After that, different governments have tried to reduce the economic dependency and to take power of all areas of democracy slowly. And actually, you could state that today it's mainly the police, the courts, and it's the actual power of foreign policy that is still Danish, while we actually have the powers of on all other matters in the Faroe Islands. We've also been working since the year 2000 on the Faroese constitution. It has not been applied yet by Parliament. It has not been to a referendum. There was planned a referendum this year, and it has been postponed. So again, in my opinion, the way forward, and this is speaking for my party and for myself, I think the way forward is to the Faroes people to apply a Faroes constitution where we state the right to self-determination and the rights of the citizens, and state in the process of establishing the Faroe state by referendum. That is stated in the constitution how you should go forward to establish a Faroe state. The way forward is also ongoing connections to all relevant international fora of cooperation as a subject to international law. And of course, to still ongoing establish all democratic and political structures in the Faroe Islands that can uphold the rights of the citizens and the equal rights of citizens of this nation. And then the Faroe people can decide to have a referendum on full independence when we have first applied the Faroe Constitution. This has been the plan for some years, in some parts of the political process, but we haven't reached that point yet. Well, the right of self-determination in the 21st century, Magne mentioned it as a framework. We had the Wilson Doctrine after the First World War, then the UN Charter and the Covenants after the Second World War, the decolonization in the 1950s, 60s, and perhaps 70s, the dissolvement of the Soviet Union. But now we have the question of how to cope with globalization in the 21st century. And in my opinion, even though we have the establishment of rights according to international law, we are still in the gap between the power of rights or the rights of powers. So despite all international law and vision of rights, it's still the power of the old nation states determining the outcome and development of these rights. And we see it in different, with different hard powers or soft powers, but this is still the question for, I think, for all our nations here. In my opinion, we should focus on that self-determination and development of our nation in the 21st century is all about democracy. And we have to address that the narrative of secession and instability and isolation and so on from the old nation states when we debate independence in the 21st century, we have to go against that. Because that is still the old paradigm, which is the basis of international and European debate today. But we have to focus that self-determination in the 21st century has to be about democracy and responsibility in the globalized world. And this should be the foundation of all debates and decisions on this matter. And I believe that the ability and responsibility to form democratic societies and uphold the rights of the people are core to this process. And the ability and responsibility to fulfill and develop international agreements and international cooperation is the basis for the self-determination in the 21st century. And I believe that there are nations present here today and also in other parts of the world that can fulfill this and can take active part in an interdependent world. That must be the vision of the international society in the future. And I should hope also in Europe, even though I think that has very dim prospects at the moment. And I firmly believe that when we go forward with self-determination in the 21st century, that can also be the basis for peace, prosperity, and international development when we acknowledge that also new nations on the global arena can take part in the globalization and the international agreements and work for the peace, prosperity, and international development of the whole world. So I believe that we should reverse the narrative and not always become in a defense position where we should say, why will you be independent? But we shall ask, why not? Why shouldn't we be independent if we are able to do this and take part of the world with responsibility? That's actually my vision for the future, and I hope that this conference also will lead to some concrete results on that matter. Just to conclude, here we are. I mentioned that the Faroe Islands are, we call ourselves a large ocean nation, and actually at the moment the Faroe Islands are also claiming the right Ever there? Well, Leot, Backa. Oh, it doesn't matter. Just to conclude, that we are also claiming the right to a huge area of the South Atlantic area, and of course, when we come to that, we will also act according to all international responsibilities on that matter. So, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Høgni Høydal, for a very good presentation. We have opening for some questions, and here on the front row we have some people from the Føroyar University as well who are not necessarily affiliated to our party, so they have the possibility to come forward with critical questions.
Please do so.
Byron?
Yeah. Thank you for your presentation. It was very interesting. My question will be, if you don't think that the independence movement in the Faroe Islands has focused too much on or been too hopeful about what international law can deliver in this matter. Because, I mean, when the independence coalition in the year 2000 went to Copenhagen to negotiate for independence, as we all know, the Danes were pretty unimpressed by the self-determination argument. And as late as this year, the Danish foreign minister has answered Magni Arge that we have a right, I interpret it as some kind of political or moral right to self-determination, but they think it's irrelevant from an international legal perspective. So my question is if we shouldn't just focus more on the political part of the question, see it as a political struggle and play it down the international legal argument a bit.
Well, thank you, Bar. I do not quite agree. I don't think it's a matter of either or. I think that what we experienced in the negotiations in the year 2000 was that it was impossible to have a negotiation on any equal basis as long as Denmark didn't acknowledge a right to self-determination. So I think that the rights according to international law is also a basis for civilized negotiation, because we have always acknowledged that we should negotiate with Denmark on a civilized treaty. And I would reverse the question and say, why shouldn't Denmark acknowledge our right to self-determination? What is the basis for why they don't do that? And why? No, that's my question to the Danish government. It has been so often, and I have never got an answer. Why weren't the Faroe Islands put on the list in 1946? No question, because then there was a plan to integrate us, and I think that will just be to the honor of Denmark if they did so, and also negotiate with the Faroe Islands when there's a majority to do so, based upon international law. That would, in my opinion, also create a more civilized debate here in the Faroe Islands. Because we know that the debate also is always based upon fear and isolation and so on. I think that would lift the debate in the Faroe Islands up to a new level. And still, the vision of Faroe's independence is also a vision of taking part of the world. So why shouldn't we deal with this as an internal Danish matter? I have never understood. Please.
Barry?
Just to supplement the question, I totally agree that we are in need of international law in this area, but as a matter of fact, we don't have international law in this area. I mean, it's a matter of mainstream international law that only so-called non-self-governing territories have the right to external self-determination and implicitly a right to secession inherent in that. And the Faroe Islands has never gotten the status as a non-self-governing entity or a territory, and I don't see any strategy from the Faroe side to argue for that position. And all the parties in the Faroe Islands, except the old self-governing party, are electing representatives to the Danish parliament. And if there's one feature in an arrangement that counts against being viewed as a colony or non-self-governing territory, that's exactly participating in the metropolitan political system and electing your representatives to their parliament. With all the respect for what you are doing in the Danish parliament. Thank you.
Well, I partly agree, Bar. There are contradictions in many of our dispositions also as political parties. Also when our party participates in election to the Danish parliament. The first year we didn't do so. It was mostly for pragmatic reasons and to have the independence issue on the agenda. So there are contradictions there, but still I believe that also with all the history between the Faroe Islands and Denmark, what should be the problem that Denmark acknowledged the Faroe Islands as a, according to international law. The Faroese government at that time, with Jonas Eidskog as Prime Minister, sent a letter to Denmark that was sent to the UN, but it was never acknowledged by the Danish government. So why not? I think that will be the next step to civilize this process even more. And also to reduce fear in the Faroe Islands for this process. It is not a question of isolation and economic disaster. It can be a question of modern development in the globalized world.
We have room for a question more. Yep. Would you present yourself?
Thank you very much. My name is Ilan Kiloy. I'm from the Solomon Islands and is part of the delegation from New Caledonia. Thank you very much, for the presentation. It's just a question of interest from our part. You mentioned in your slide, which is really clear on how international law interacts with domestic law here in Faroe. And just a point of interest as to the conflict between international law and domestic law, and how does it play out? I think it's a question of interest on how to contrast in the case of New Caledonia, where there is a Nouméa Accord that complements the process for decolonization. And so just from that perspective, for our information, and so that we can see how international law is in conflict with the domestic law, and what exactly is the main point of conflict or the issue. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much. I don't have a clear answer to that, of course, but we can state that you can state yourself as a subject to international law according to the UN Charter and to the covenants and so on. And as I understand, you have also conflicts with domestic law on that matter. We will hear about it later, but I believe there's no dispute about your right to self-determination. And there still is some kind of that in the Danish constitution. It's still a constitution for a unitary state. When we debate with the Danes, they still claim that the Danish constitution is the sole basis for all rights of the Faroese people, also to independence. They have stated that they will accept independence, and I believe they will, even though I think that the biggest fear of Danish government is that Faroese independence will lead to Greenlandic independence, because there are still huge interests, especially in the Arctic and so on. So this is still a dispute here, but as I believe in your case, it's undisputed that you have the right to self-determination and can choose for yourselves. And that is still disputed here.
Ragnar, one last question. Could you comment on whether there would have been a different position for the Faroe Islands in the negotiations with Denmark back in the year 2000 about independence or a free association, if we had this right of self-determination accepted by Denmark and announced to the international society?
Yes, I firmly believe so. Not only for the climate of the negotiations, but also to the to the question of equality when we negotiated, because we were constantly met with that demands, all the demands from the Danish government were based upon the Danish constitution, and also when we debated the big issue of a civilized economical transition period and so on. I think that the acknowledgement of the Faroe Islands or the Faroese people as a subject to international law would also have led to better negotiations, because then we would also have the possibility to have a mediator from international bodies if that was possible. I can just add to that, when we went to the negotiation in the year 2000, we used Iceland as an example. They gained independence precisely 100 years ago, also in a kind of a free association. We experienced that was not very good for the negotiations, because the Danes still felt that Iceland had not been respectful to Denmark when they finally made their own republic during the Second World War. So there are many also historical conflicts in the negotiations, but still I think it would create a better image for Denmark, a more honorable entrance to the whole negotiation if we had this question cleared from the first time. Yes.
Høgni Hoydal, time is up, and we will have a chance to put forward some questions when the debate is coming on. Thank you to Høgni Hoydal. Should we give him an applause? Our next speaker is from Scotland. Scotland has very much been on the agenda in Faroes, where we have followed the independence referendum back in 2014. And the whole of UK is very much on the radar here in the North Atlantic and elsewhere in Europe because of the Brexit. And that has also sparked and ignited two new discussions in Scotland about independence and referendum and things like that. And out of Scotland, from our nearest neighbour is Kenneth Gibson. He was elected to the very first Scottish parliament in 1999 in modern times, and he has served in the parliament for 19 years. And the floor is yours, Kenneth.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Magni, and also thank you to Høgni. And I have to say that I've never used one of these pieces of technology before, so I hope you can all hear me loud and clear. And first of all, I want to thank my Faroese hosts for their kindness and for inviting me here as a representative of the Scottish Parliament and the Scottish National Party to speak to you today. I share your disappointment that Charles and Daniel were unable to bring the weather from their countries, but I brought the weather from my country. I've actually been very fascinated by this nation of the Faroe Islands for many years, and in fact on the 12th of July in my Facebook page I posted Faroese Nation, a 30-minute documentary that you may have seen, which many people in Scotland find inspirational about life here in the Faroes and how that inspires us in Scotland. So this is a two-way process. Little did I understand at that time that only 3 months later I would be here in the Faroes for the first time ever speaking to you. Now, normally I speak about 180 words a minute. Because of my Scottish accent, I will try and speak a little bit more slowly so that you can understand me. So, we meet today during one of the most tumultuous periods of UK and by extension Scottish politics. The chaos and uncertainty which has consumed Westminster following the 2016 referendum on leaving the European Union threatens to inflict serious and lasting harm on the lives of people across Scotland. Not content with failing to rebuild the economy after the economic collapse delivered by their Labour predecessors, the UK Tory government will deepen that hardship by delivering an economically nonsensical Brexit. which in our view would be nothing short of disaster for Scotland, with an anticipated 80,000 jobs lost and the door closed on the talented EU workers who support our economy, around 173,000 at present. This means a smaller, weaker, poorer Scottish economy, the exact opposite of what voters were promised by the UK government in 2014, when they were actually told that unless they voted no, Scotland would be thrown out of the European Union during the independence referendum. Of course, we in Scotland didn't vote for the Tory government. We hadn't voted Conservative in Scotland since 1955. We didn't vote for the referendum on leaving the European Union, and we didn't vote for Brexit. And in that referendum, 62% of people in Scotland voted to remain within the European Union. And we certainly did not vote to crash out of the European Union with no deal. Nevertheless, the SNP, and we have 35 members of the United Kingdom Parliament, has engaged constructively with each step of the Brexit process. Our MPs at Westminster, and I have to say my wife is one of them, have proven themselves willing to find solutions that work for Scotland, but have been largely ignored. When the Scottish Parliament was urged to grant consent for Prime Minister Theresa May's EU withdrawal bill, the Scottish Parliament decisively rejected that by 93 votes to 30. Not only the 63 Scottish National Party MSPs supported it, but also Labour, Liberal Democrat and Green MSPs also. And the reason was because it would return 24 EU powers to the UK government post-Brexit. And many of these powers are intertwined with devolved powers, powers that Scotland has already. These powers include those over state aid for industry, genetically modified crops policy, fishing quotas and farm subsidies, all of which should rightfully be in Scotland's hands. Anything less than returning these is a Westminster power grab, and a shameless one at that. At Westminster, the UK government showed contempt for the devolved parliaments of Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland as the EU withdrawal bill was pushed through without a single thought to the views of our devolved parliaments. This demonstrates that Westminster is not negotiating in good faith with the Scottish Parliament over Brexit, and the wider Scottish public is not blind to this. With that being said, what are the possible outcomes of Brexit? We could stay in the EU the way things are going, which is what Scotland voted for. We could be forced to leave. But the only sensible evidence-led option in our view is to stay in the single market and the customs union, even if we do leave. But should we be forced down the no-deal route, then the dislocation will be sudden, cumulative and long-lasting. Some suggest, although I personally believe it alarmist, that we will experience shortages because of customs delays, which will doubtless cause difficulties for businesses which export or rely on complex supply chains. It would mean a reduction in crucial investment from outside Scotland, a fortress mentality from a hostile UK government likely to see devolution as disposable. There remains also the Prime Minister's Chequers proposals, which leave no one much the wiser as to what the terms of exit are or what the terms will be of any future relationship. To lay matters out plainly, if there is no offer and no possibility at the very least of a single market and customs union outcome, either for the UK as a whole or for Scotland as a differentiated part of it, then there is no meaningful option offered at all, and no option that can or will have SNP support. Of course, it's simply a fact that those keenest on Brexit are those who dislike Scotland having a parliament the most. Their voices are loud and heard at the heart of the UK government. They regard anything that interferes with the so-called sovereignty of Westminster as dangerous and unacceptable. They want rid of voices that speak of modern democracy, modern constitutions and modern trading agreements. Of course, regardless of the machinations and manoeuvres taking place in London and Brussels, the job of the SNP as a party and in government is to both make sure that Scotland flourishes no matter the circumstances we find ourselves in, but also to ensure that at the right moment the choice of independence can be made. I say at the right moment, not the most comfortable moment or the moment that best relieves our natural impatience for change, but the moment at which our country is persuaded, ready and determined to win. The Scottish Parliament has a mandate for independence, and indeed a majority of MSPs voted 69 to 59 last year to authorise the Scottish Government to request a transfer of powers from the UK Parliament to hold a second referendum. Voters in 2014 could never have anticipated the chaos we're now in just 4 years down the line, and they deserve another chance to decide Scotland's future, given the changing political and economic landscape that Brexit has brought. Our vision is to build on the powers of the Scottish Parliament and build on a record of achievement in government, whilst also showing people just what Scotland could achieve with the powers of independence. Sharing experience and knowledge with nations such as the Faroe Islands is a key part of that. We have a shared interest. After all, Faroese mitochondria are 84% Celtic female, the Y chromosome 87% Scandinavian male, that proves that Faroese Vikings raided Scotland and Ireland for women. I'm glad you're now a wee bit better behaved. As a member of the SNP's new campaigns committee, which is numbers 7 of us, chaired by SNP Deputy Leader Keith Brown MSP, we are already laying the foundations for a future independence campaign. We are mobilising the SNP's vast membership base of 125,000, which is bigger than the UK Tory party, and designing new campaign materials and exploring new engaging ways of communicating to help attract new supporters to the cause of independence. We've hosted 3 national assemblies across Scotland, which proved to be a great platform to discuss economic policy. There have been demands for further events of this format, and we will explore taking this forward in future weeks and months. 13 days ago, we had a national day of action when our activists went out and knocked doors, held street stalls and spoke to voters. And last Saturday, we had a march through Edinburgh with over 100,000 people participating, calling for independence. Now, when I was just a boy, I went on an independence march, and there were 300 of us. 300, now 100,000. So things have moved forward dramatically just in my lifetime. So we're on a campaign footing and putting forward our vision for a positive future for Scotland. A Delta poll survey only this month found that Brexit would tip public opinion in Scotland towards independence, with 47% of Scots in favour of independence, 43% against, and 10% who did not know. Votes up for grabs. This is a fight the SNP can and will win. Finally, I'm joining you today fresh from our party conference in Glasgow, which concluded on Tuesday after 3 days of exciting, engaging policy and campaign discussions. The theme of the conference, which we had 4,000 delegates at, was hope. Many announcements emerged from conference, demonstrating that we are moving towards an ever fairer Scotland, doing what we can with the powers that we have now. We heard from our First Minister that Scotland will put fair work first by extending fair work criteria such as the living wage to as many funding streams of business support grants as possible, meaning public money will support business which pay workers fairly, promote secure contracts and eliminate the gender pay gap. We heard from the Finance Secretary, Derek Mackay, that legislation to introduce Scotland's new National Investment Bank will be brought forward next year with a commitment to capitalise the bank with £2 billion, around 16 billion Danish crowns. We heard about a new infrastructure commission which will advise on investment priorities and, importantly, explore the feasibility of government-owned national infrastructure company. We are building a new Scotland, a Scotland for all. But we could do so much more free of the chaos and incompetence of Westminster. How much more hope will be possible when we take Scotland's future into Scotland's hands and become an independent country, we ask. It is our duty, it is our ambition, and it is our vision to build an independent Scotland, and an independent Scotland works for all. Thank you.
Yeah, you will not escape this place until you had some questions, okay?
That's why I'm still here.
But
thank you. I
Yes.
just want to continue from the question to Høgni Hoydal, or in relation to Scotland. Are you satisfied in Scotland that the basis for your right to self-determination is internal to the British legal system, or or does the international legal aspect enter your debate?
Well, the international legal aspect doesn't really enter our debate. First of all, Scotland has its own legal system, which it has had since before the 1707 Act of Union. When Scotland and England united, they spent so many centuries trying to conquer Scotland. Eventually, the King of Scotland became King of England, and the two parliaments merged. So it was a kind of Scottish takeover, if you think about it. When our parliaments merged in 1707, there were two main criteria. Our legal system remained intact, and I know that's a major issue here in the Faroes because police and justice are under the control of Scotland, and I realise that they're not under control here. And secondly, our education system remained under Scottish control. We had 4 universities when England had 2, etc., etc. So, first country in the world with 3 education. So the position within the United Kingdom has been clearly set out because we had the Edinburgh Agreement before the 2014 referendum, which recognised that Scotland does have a right to independence and decide its own future. What the United Kingdom government is saying at the moment is that because of the Brexit negotiations and the fact that there's civil war within the Conservative Party and indeed the Labour Party as well over this particular issue, I'll give you just one little aside. The Labour Party's policy is constructive ambiguity to Brexit. What that means is we make people think who vote leave think we want to vote leave, we support leave, and people who remain, we want them to think we support remain. So, but anyway, the overall situation in the United Kingdom is that the UK government has said not while Brexit negotiations are ongoing, and we accept that position. But because our own Parliament has already voted that we can have a referendum, we have an electoral mandate. Our party get the highest share of the vote of any political party in Europe at the last election, 47%. Then we can call that referendum. And my own view is that it should be called around about this time next year. It should be called and held around about this time next year. One thing I would say is the difference between Scotland, and I had this debate in Catalonia a decade ago when I was out speaking there, is we have only one national party. All views, left-wing, right-wing, liberal, whatever, are all under the one umbrella because for us the most important issue is independence for Scotland, and therefore we have one united voice. That makes a big difference because in Westminster elections, where it's first past the post, we can destroy generally any unionist party because they're split, whereas we can, with 45% of the vote in any constituency, can win almost anywhere. So that is very important, having a unified voice. I know that's not easy here, but that's how we have been able to build our party and put independence on the front foot. So a long-winded answer, but I hope that answers some of your question. One other thing I would say is, I realise you made the point about Faroese politicians going into the Reichstag in Copenhagen. I'm not just saying it because my wife is a member of the Westminster Parliament, but there are so many issues that are dealt with at the United Kingdom level. I'll just mention, well, there's so many, everything welfare, foreign policy, but let's just suggest Trident. The United Kingdom government wants to spend £200 billion, that's 1,600 billion Danish crowns, on a new nuclear missile system. Our MPs have to be in Westminster to vote against that, to make sure people know that Scotland doesn't want that. Not just because it would be based in Scotland, but we don't want nuclear weapons anywhere. So we think it's important that we have members of Parliament in there giving Scotland's voice. Otherwise, we would have unionist politicians who do not represent Scotland deciding for us. Don't be shy.
Don't be
shy. I won't bite. God, look at this. The descendants of Vikings. Come on.
While they're gaining power to put forward more questions,
yeah.
Could you elaborate a little bit on how come that it has developed from this first march of yours with 300 people has raised to 100,000 in a fairly short
it's actually
term?
Well, it's quite astonishing. I joined the SNP. The SNP was formed in 1934, and it was a very much a fringe movement. So what happened? Our education system is Scottish, but was dominated by United Kingdom history. So when we were taught at school, we were only taught English history, never Scottish history or anything about Scotland, blah, blah, blah. So there was a very strong unionist British mentality in Scotland. Scotland, there was an attempt after the Union to rename Scotland North Britain. England was still England, but Scotland was North Britain. So when I was a boy, you had the North British Railway Company, the North British Hotel, all these North British things, right? But after the Second World War, there was a kind of small movement for what was called a kind of Scottish Parliament. And it got 2 million signatures. And it was presented to Westminster. And Winston Churchill said the only way you will get a parliament is if you win elections. And so our party, which at that time had people from all political persuasions and all parties, you could be in the Labour Party, Conservative Party, Communist Party, whatever it happened to be. Communist Party was big, of course, in those days. All these parties you could, and be in the SNP. So then we decided you could only be a member of the SNP and no other political party. So 90% of people left, and the small group that were left were dedicated to pushing forward the independence idea. We didn't have any newspapers or radio stations. In 1959, we had only 2 candidates for Parliament out of 71 constituencies. And gradually, bit by bit, speaking to people, knocking doors, we built up and built up and built up and built up. And then, so the pressure for the Scottish Parliament, the Unionist parties, Conservative and Labour, thought if they promise a kind of Danegeld idea, if you promise the Scottish people a wee parliament, then they won't want any more. So we had a referendum in 1997 to have the re-establishment of the Scottish Parliament. 75% of people supported that, and our Parliament was re-established in 1999. And since then, we have always seen devolution as a process, not an event. So it's not just Scotland gets these powers and that's it. We are always trying to build on those powers and get more and more powers devolved to us, as indeed the Faroes is. So we've just built up, and what happened in 2014 was astonishing. Our party had about 25,000 members. After the referendum, the Conservative and Labour parties had worked together, age-old enemies of left and right, and it was seen by a huge proportion of the people of Scotland that these parties were working against Scotland. And so after the referendum was narrowly lost, our membership went from 25,000 to over 100,000 in a week. Thousands of people, 10,000 people a day joined the party. And the Westminster elections, we went from having 6 MPs out of 59 to 56 out of 59. We swept all the Unionists away. Places that had voted Labour for 70 years were transformed. Our vote was going, in my constituency, the vote went for our party from like 20 to 50% almost overnight. So you can move mountains if the political mood music is correct and you have the right message. And it has to be positive, it has to be engaging, it has to be visionary. We did make mistakes in that referendum. I don't want to drone on too long, but one of the things I said this morning was our party leader thought we should have a 3-year referendum campaign. All that did was allow all the opposition to mobilise against us. When they had the Brexit referendum, it was 3 months, and the Brexit campaigners, it wasn't called by the Leavers, but it was one by the Leavers, because it was about their vision, not a vision I necessarily agreed with, but there was a vision that won through. So it's about the vision that matters rather than the fine detail. We produced a 700-page document about how an independent Scotland would look, and all that happens is they go to page 321 and say, what about that? And page 275, and what about that? So it's about the vision thing, you know, self-determination, putting your own future in your own hands, you deciding for yourself, not your next door neighbour, even if they're the nicest neighbour. And as I said this morning, just one last thing I'll say, is our party leader always used to say, it's better to have a friendly neighbour than a surly lodger. In other words, it's better to have someone who lives next door to you and is your best friend, and Faroes would be best friends to Denmark, than have someone who is perhaps unhappy. So, and we like English people. I mean, they're closest to us in terms of history, sense of humour, language. We do like them. We just don't want to have their parliament run our country.
We have another question here.
Hello. My name is Jekwan. Let's say you have another independence referendum. Let's say you win. Let's say you establish an independent Scottish
state.
Yay!
Yeah.
I can retire.
But by then, you're well and truly outside the European Union.
Yeah.
So what happens then?
Yeah, that's a really...
I want to point out we're outside the EU,
Yeah.
as is Norway, as is Iceland.
Yeah. At the moment, our party position is very clear. We don't want to leave the European Union. There's a whole number of reasons for that, because, but I think we would have to decide on the circumstances then. I mean, it's not, you know, you can't really say, oh, we'll just argue to come back in again. I think we would have to look at the circumstances at that point. I think that's quite clear what we would do. I think the mood in our party is that we'd prefer to stay in, and most people in our party would prefer to go back in if we were not in the European Union and have to go through that probably tedious process of joining. But it may be that if there's 1, 2, 3, 4 years elapse, we think, do you know what? We can do perfectly well without outside the European Union. I think the economic shock would be initial, but I think after that it would be that perhaps we could survive and thrive outside the European Union. I don't see any reason why not, to be perfectly honest with you. I always think, I was saying this morning, independence is not a miracle cure. I mean, you know, many countries have become independent with no resources, you know. I mean, for example, Singapore, whatever you think of the democratic structures here, has become an economic titan in the world. With the Ukraine has become a poverty-stricken backwater despite having phenomenal resources. It's about the quality of people you elect and the policies they take forward. But at the end of the day, any decision you make yourself has got to be better than someone else making it. And again, I always point out to people when I'm chatting to ordinary people on the doorstep, I always say, any country that's got independence has never surrendered that afterwards. They don't say, do you know what, I don't like taking these decisions, go on, you take them. You know what I mean? To me, it's just a sensible, straightforward thing, and more people are coming to realise that, you know. And I think most people in the Faroes will feel liberated when they have their own country. I mean, to stand on your own stage. Even last night, I went to the football match last night, and it wasn't the best result for the Faroe Islands, but I just think it's great that the Faroe Islands is competing in FIFA. I mean, 30 years ago, you didn't. We still remember the glorious 1-0 victory over Austria, which I think was fantastic. So I mean,
more or less beating Scotland.
It's not about separate. Yeah. Aye. Okay, we were complacent in the first 20 minutes. God, I've lost my train of. We don't want to separate. We want to participate. We want Scotland, and I'm sure the Faroes and Catalonia are the same, want to be part of the world's institutions. We want to be. We work with people. Share things. You know, we're not talking about isolation, we're talking about partnership. But with a partnership where we take the main decisions that affect our people.
Kenneth Gibson, thank you very much. Give him applause. Now, ladies and gentlemen, to a very exotic place in the world. It is more or less on the other side of the globe compared to the Faroe Islands. As far as I know, it's about 2,000 kilometers northeast of Australia. It's called New Caledonia. And it's very interesting that the guy who was on stage just before, he comes out of Scotland, and the name New Caledonia obviously means New Scotland originally. So we have just heard about Old Scotland, now we're going to hear about the new one. And the representative who has come out of New Caledonia, the leader of the delegation, is Daniel Goa. I know that in a paper we have written that he is a president of New Caledonia. That is not right. He is a president to be after independence. But he is the leader of the independence movement in New Caledonia. And he will be presenting together with Ilan Kilo. And the floor is yours. Please.
Bonjour. Ta holim barinanda. Ta metuna rani mita amenahot. Indo manatena yuk ngao, yuk nigo, ayuk marumba, ay hun. Indo pona mona utagodara ni yang diun pa he ni minat. Hari pepe ni tuhimo, awe muhimo. Au mamuina neven faire évoluer le pays. Indo on hole boinanda aita mana mitanga mena Korea na mihina peli hainda da mitanga da manjene nemi. Indo on du moinga ai li palangaru kiloe. O kape ye wohana hinan pu farangele. So palpalalang. Indo hole boinanda no koi.
Thank you very much. The Prime Minister of Føroyar Island, the Deputy Prime Minister, the Speaker of Parliament, all members of Parliament that are present here today, the independent leaders of Catalonia, Scottish, and also others that are present here today, ladies and gentlemen. For practical reasons, I stand here today to present this statement on behalf of the leader of delegation as well as the president of the Carnegie Association for Liberation Movement. We also have, as part of the delegation, the permanent secretary of the Carnegie Liberation Movement that are here with us, as well as the president of the youth organization in New Caledonia, Mr. Dimitri Kenenge. So on behalf, I'm presenting this statement, and I'll try to go really slowly so that we can follow the case in New Caledonia. First of all, I would like to express our most sincere appreciation to Honorable Magna AG for the invitation extended to us to participate in this conference, as well as the courtesies and hospitalities that were extended to us since our arrival here in your beautiful country. The question that we would like to address this afternoon is what role has the United Nations played in the implementation of the Nouméa Code? And we will try to provide some elements of analysis and reflections of what we think are the reasons. And I have stated earlier on in my question and remark, the Nouméa Code is an agreement that was signed between the Carnegie Liberation Movement and the administrative power of France that sets out the process for decolonization of New Caledonia. To begin with, the United Nations, with the adoption of the General Assembly Resolution 1514 of 14 December 1960 on the Declaration on the Granting of Independence to Colonial Countries and Powers, provided a clear framework under Article 1 and 2. The subjection of the people to foreign domination and the exploitation constitutes a denial of fundamental human rights, is contrary to the Charter of United Nations and undermines the cause of world peace and cooperation. All peoples have the right to self-determination, and by virtue of this right can freely determine their political status and freely pursue their economic, social, and cultural development. In addition, the Declaration of Human Rights and all global decisions would enshrine the right of colonized people in this vision. For example, the United Nations International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights which have the same article in 1.1. For all peoples have the right to self-determination. Subsequently, the United Nations General Assembly adopted the establishment of the Special Committee on Decolonization, which is responsible for implementing the declaration with a series of technical and legal tools, enabling to accompany the non-self-governing territories with an annual work plan and mandate. Kanaki, New Caledonia, the Melanesian land of the Pacific, was colonized by France for over 65 years ago to this day. The colonized Kanaki people experience all sorts of challenges, forms of colonial repression, exploitation of resources, suppression of right to speak their own language, right to education, and right to work until the end of the Second World War, when, like all colonized people of the world, they began to enter into a new political dynamics, materialized by the right to vote that they had in 1953. Then we tried as best we could to put our people in a position of progress. The winds of freedom that blew across Melanesia in the Pacific in the 1970s and 1980s, following the independence of most of the countries in Melanesia, including Papua New Guinea, Fiji, Solomon Islands, and Vanuatu, gave a new impetus to the New Caledonian struggle. It was in this context that the struggle of influence began with France to get the Kanaki people to admit and to exercise the right to self-determination. This struggle culminated on 2nd December 1986 with the reinstatement of Kanaki New Caledonia on the United Nations list of decolonized territories for the decolonization process. Since then, the General Assembly has adopted an annual resolution on Kanaki New Caledonia to observe its political progress and to watch full and complete emancipation. 32 resolutions since Resolution 32 in 1986. The Kanak Liberation Movement has signed 2 successive agreements with France and the pro-French parties. First, the Matignon Agreement in 1988, the so-called Political and Economic Rebalancing Agreement, and the Nouméa Agreement in 1998. The process for emancipation and decolonization process with the Kanaks at the center of the system and an irreversible transfer of competencies until obtaining full sovereignty. We are therefore coming to the end of this modern and innovative process of decolonization with the referendum that will be held just 23 days from now, on the 4th of November 2018, that's next month, during which the population consent will have to answer to the question, which is, do you want New Caledonia to attain full sovereignty and become independent? So that's the question that will be answered on 4th of November. Nevertheless, the last 20 years have not been easy. The process for decolonization and total implementation of the political agreements that was signed with France, which perpetuated a system of exploitation of wealth, which favors a growing social imbalance on the one hand, and on the other hand, to watch the administrating power, which has organized or facilitated massive immigration aimed at making us a minority in our own country, thus allowing it to structure their influence. To fight against this dominance, we are able to rely on the support of our Pacific neighbors, and in particular the Melanesian Spearhead Group. And at this juncture, I would like to say a bit more about Melanesian Spearhead Group, what it constitutes and what it stands for. The Melanesian Spearhead Group is a sub-regional organization in the Pacific that consists of Melanesian countries, namely Papua New Guinea, the Solomon Islands, my home country, Vanuatu, Fiji, and the Kanak Liberation Movement of New Caledonia. Fiji obtained independence in 1970. Papua New Guinea obtained their independence in 1975. The Solomon Islands and their independence in 1978. And Vanuatu in 1980. So these are the sort of influence that led to the formation of the sub-regional organization. And only one member, the Kanak Liberation Movement, that's still under a colonial administrative. And so the organization was formed basically to support the struggle of Kanaki people to obtain their independence. In 2013, the leaders of the MSG, in short, the Melanesian Spearhead Group, adopted a declaration in Noumea that's called the Noumean Declaration, reaffirming their support for the independent movement in New Caledonia. And early this year, during the meeting in Port Moresby in Papua New Guinea, an action plan was adopted to further their support for the independence movement in New Caledonia. And all the member countries of the MSG are also members of the United Nations, two of which are also members of the Spatial Decolonization Committee. So the strategies that we use to support the independence movement in New Caledonia is through the United Nations, through that framework that we've established, and through the influence of our ambassadors in New York. And so that's the connection. And we also lobby internationally, regionally, and nationally to implement and to continue to support the struggle of New Caledonia towards independence. And that's the main reason I'm here with the delegation, to continue to advocate for this noble cause. It is in this context that since March 2014, we have been able to benefit from 5 United Nations movements missions to New Caledonia. 3 missions by the Department of Political Affairs of the United Nations, electoral observation missions, and 2 visiting missions of the Special Committee on Decolonization. The reports of these missions are primarily diplomatic in nature. Nevertheless, we note that the subject denounced by the FLNKS or the concerns raised by the Kanaki movement for liberation find a sincere place in the official decisions of the General Assembly. And in particular on these particular issues that have been raised. Firstly, on the electoral process, the UN noted there are certain breach of principles of equality in the treatment of voters. It also noted treatment of voters in similar cases that the right of appeal was ineffective. And it invited the administering power to review its methods of drawing up the electoral process, and in particular the electoral list. On natural resources, the United Nations reaffirmed that natural resources are the heritage of the people of the non-self-governing territory, including the Kanaki indigenous peoples. And in this context, the General Assembly urges the administering power to take appropriate measures to protect and guarantee the rights of the New Caledonian people over the natural resources. On immigration, the General Assembly noted the continuing concern of the Kanaki people about the underrepresentation in the government and social structures due to the continuing migration of people into New Caledonia. On the referendum process, the General Assembly noted that appropriate measures needs to be taken for the organization of the future consultation on full sovereignty, including the establishment of a fair, regular, credible, and transparent electoral list, as provided for in the Numea Accord, are essential for the achievement of a free and fair act of self-determination in accordance with the Charter and the principles and practices of the United Nations. Recently, in March this year, the second visiting mission of the Special Committee on Decolonization also noted that racial discrimination continues to be developed against the indigenous people of Kanaki. And so, in short, we consider that the Kanak liberation movement has significant political leverage that will allow us to bounce back in the event if the outcome of the referendum next month turns out to be against us. On the other hand, in the event, if the referendum outcome is in favor of the Kanaki people, we will propose the establishment of a 2 to 4 year plan, a period for the establishment of the new state under the United Nations, what's to enable us to establish the foundations of the new state. The proclamation of the new state will activate our exit from the list of the countries under the decolonization list. And before I conclude, I would like to tell you that while the recent opinion polls turns out to be against independence, we are hoping that the outcome could change and be in our favor. An accession of New Caledonia to independence would constitute a historic opportunity for our planet because it will make it possible to better respond to the global challenges facing our society today at the local, regional, and international level to ensure the advancement of peaceful cooperation amongst nations. Ladies and gentlemen, with these few remarks, I would like to again thank you for your attention. Thank you, Tomas. Thank you, Vinaka Vakalevu Oleti.
Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation on the path to independence in New Caledonia and on matters that mean so much to you in your home country. We have a question for you. I hope you will be ready to answer. And Björn Konoi, Joshua.
I'll start with English and then I may translate also to French. I'll do it myself, thank you. The situation of New Caledonia is quite singular if comparisons made to Catalonia or the Faroe Islands for that matter. You are a subject of international law because you are under the obligations that arise for France with regard to Chapter 11 under the United Nations Charter. Yet the normal rule would be that it's a discretion for the state, the member state of the United Nations, to determine which subjects are entitled to fall within the realm of Chapter 11. Yet you managed, with significant endeavours, to engage the General Assembly of the United Nations to adopt a resolution, notwithstanding the position of France on that particular question, but the result of which is that New Caledonia was a part of those subjects which fall under Chapter 11. And I would think it very interesting to hear more about that process, as it is, from an international legal point of view, a very interesting step. And secondly, an interesting matter also in this regard, with regard to the referendum which is being held on 4th November, is what are the criteria to participate in elections? Is it residence, or would one have to have resided in New Caledonia for X amount of years or months in order to be entitled to participate in elections? Je disais tout court que normalement la procédure c'est que c'est l'État membre des Nations Unies qui a les droits discrétionnaires de décider quel territoire tombe sous le chapitre 11 de la charte de l'ONU. Et par contre, dans le cas de la Nouvelle-Calédonie, c'est effectivement des États de la région qui ont réussi à faire en sorte que l'Assemblée générale a pris ordre de cette question et a adopté une résolution dont le résultat est que la Nouvelle-Calédonie tombe dans le chapitre 11 de la charte de l'ONU. Nonobstant la position de la France sur cette petite question. Et ma deuxième question, c'était, ce sera bien intéressant de savoir quels sont les critères afin de participer dans les élections le 4 novembre. C'est un critère de résidence. Faut-il avoir vécu sur le territoire de la Nouvelle-Calédonie pendant X mois ou années? Bien, merci d'avance de votre réponse.
Le premier, moi je prends le deuxième. Moi, deuxième.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that very good question. I think I'll try to answer the first part of the question, and our Linda will answer the second part of the question. I think my understanding on your question, the first part, through the framework of the United Nations, as you've rightly said that under the United Nations Charter and the subsequent resolutions that confirmed the right for self-determination of people, had in fact, recognized the process that is happening in New Caledonia. And that, for us, is an advantage, because we use that process to advocate for the right of self-determination. More importantly, in that process, the engagement that we have with our missions at the United Nations have proved to be very essential and important. Initially because of the influence that our members have and the connections and the networkings that we have at the United Nations, and to be able to raise consent with regards to the referendum process, but as well as the process itself and the support of the MSG, the Melanesian Spain Group. So it has been quite successful in terms of advancing and promoting the process at the international level, in particular the United Nations. And the action plan that was adopted by our leaders this year, that I have alluded into in my statement, that recognizes that process for us to continue that support at the United Nations, and to continue to provide an avenue where the liberation movement and the Kanaki people can be able to raise their issues and concerns. So that process had been very useful for the decolonization process in New Caledonia. And during sessions of this Special Committee on Decolonization, the territories under the decolonization list are also provided the opportunity to present petitions in those subcommittees. So that's another avenue that we use to be able to raise concerns and to be able to promote the decolonization process, and also to lobby for support amongst the members of the United Nations. So it has been quite successful, and from our perspective, we will continue to use that avenue to further promote and also provide assistance to the people of Kanaki in that process.
La deuxième question. Je vais répondre à la deuxième question. Vous la retraduirez en... Alors, concernant cette population qui va prendre part à la décision dans le référendum, c'est que nous sommes dans une période de décolonisation. Nous avons mis 30 ans, 10 ans de l'accord de Matignon, 10 ans de l'accord de Nouméa, ça fait 30 ans pour sortir du giron français. Et en même temps, la France, elle finance la décolonisation. Ça veut dire que beaucoup d'argent français sont arrivés, et donc il y a l'activité économique qui a monté en ampleur, et donc ça a attiré plein d'immigration. Beaucoup de gens sont arrivés parce qu'il faut travailler. Nous ne sommes qu'à 300 000 habitants, et après 165 ans de vie avec la France, on n'a toujours pas de médecin, on n'a toujours pas d'avocat, on n'a pas de juge, et je ne parle pas du niveau scolaire en milieu kanak, en milieu océanien. Ça veut dire que la France n'a rien fait pour préparer le pays à sortir. Par contre, quand il y a du développement économique qui appelle les gens à venir pour occuper les postes, eh bien, jusqu'à présent, ces gens-là ont le droit de faire le choix sur notre avenir. Ça veut dire qu'ils votent. Ils votent. Alors, celui qui arrive hier par l'avion, bah, il ne connaît pas le pays, il ne connaît pas les gens, il ne connaît même pas la situation politique du pays, bah, il vote. Il va voter pour qui? Pour la France. Donc, contre nous, qui subissons la politique de la France là-bas. Et donc, avec l'accord de Nouméa, on a dit, bon, il va falloir commencer à construire le peuple calédonien. Le peuple kanak, plus les peuples du Vietnam, de Wallis, de Tahiti, le peuple de France. Il y a une partie du peuple de France qui est admis là-bas parce que, vu son histoire, sa présence sur le pays, il a construit le pays avec nous. Et donc, nous avons choisi, selon les critères qu'on avait déterminés, de mettre en place une population qui va devenir la citoyenneté calédonienne demain. C'est cette population-là, 164 000 personnes, 174 000 personnes, qui sont les citoyens du pays. Donc c'est eux qui vont voter au référendum. Et tous les autres qui arrivent, ben, ils sont là parce qu'ils n'ont pas à choisir la destinée du pays. Par contre, les communes, les mairies, ils sont restés des mairies françaises. Donc, eux, ils peuvent voter dans les mairies pour élire les maires, pour le conseil municipal. Mais le Parlement, qu'on appelle le Congrès, comme les provinces, c'est l'organisation du pays qui a été fixée par l'accord de Nouméa, qui a 20 ans aujourd'hui. Eh bien ça concerne les Calédoniens. Donc ils vont devenir les citoyens calédoniens qui ont un pays et un droit de vote. Et voilà, je ne sais pas si j'ai...
I fully understand that he would like to explain all things to us, but there are so many of us who don't understand the French answer. So who can elaborate very shortly on the answers? Skal du gjøre?
Ja, så han säger att gång det blir 30 år sedan och att vi har samband med Sottmannen från Matignon från Nordjotfors och sen vi Nouméa avtalen från 1985 och sambart det som var upplyst så Frakland investerar några pengar i Nouméa i Ny Caledonia och det växer en Fraklandiga flotter till Ny Caledonia och chans att det kunna orga utslita vi ses det kunde inte låt i folkattkvönen och vurstan att utbyggingen rullar långt stöje mellan folk som upprunnade henne och det är så visar att för några år sedan är det just en konstruktion som heter en utbygg i Ny Caledonia men då man inte Ukraina inte kvätta innebär och vilka kriterier skulle uppfyllt för en utbygg men ändå måste vi som vara för att faktiskt komma nu i flotten i Caledonia nu gör du inte och inte ha något tillhör till stäje kommer ta låt i atkomna.
Thank you very much, Daniel Goa, and the representatives of New Caledonia. Should we give them a big applause?
Merci.
And we wish you the best of luck in the future. We have reached to a point where there is a break on the agenda. 20 minutes break, and at 15:20, Carlos Puigdemont will announce how to pronounce his name. There is something they call a keynote speaker, and that is the main speaker of a conference. And whether he has been addressed as a keynote speaker or not, the next speaker would anyway be the one who would draw most attention. I first met him, I think a year ago in 13 days or something like that, when I went to Catalonia to watch and observe how the election process went forward with the referendum on the right to vote for self-determination. And we all know how things went on that 1st of October. And we also know what has happened ever since that. You can see here on a poster over here that there are 9 of the leaders of the Catalan independence movement are in jail in Spain, and they have not been in the court yet and tried their case. Some of them are facing threats of being jailed for 30 years. And on the other picture, on the lower part of it, is a picture of 7 of the Catalan leaders who are actually today living in exile. One of them being Carles Puigdemont, who's going to address you now. And I think that we will offer you the floor, and maybe you will start by presenting yourself.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And may I just say that in Catalonia they still call him President Carles Puigdemont.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Magni. First of all, let me say a big thank you to all of you for your invitation to be present here, for your questions, I suppose. Dear Kenneth, I succeed to bring the weather that I come from, because I come from Belgium now. So that seems quite a Belgian weather, not, of course, a Catalan weather. But I will try to explain what's exactly the situation now today in Catalonia. But let me say, before that, to have explanation about what was gone 1 year ago. The self-determination referendum on the 1st of October 2017 and the subsequent political declaration of independence voted by the Parliament of Catalonia on the 27th of the same month were the culmination of the first phase of the so-called Catalan process. Catalonia decided to become an independent state, but the democratic implementation of the new republic was prevented by the force and physical violence of the Spanish state. You can see a lot of videos explaining, showing the kind of violence the Spanish state has used against peaceful citizens. After more than 7 years, the pro-independence movement in Catalonia has been demonstrating massively in a peaceful way all over the streets of our nation and has filled now and again the ballot boxes with votes for the full sovereignty of Catalonia. Every year, our National Day, in the 11th of September, has shown millions of people mobilized in favor of independence, breaking the news all over the world with its remarkably peaceful character. With people of all age, these mobilizations have been the biggest in Europe since the fall of communism and Berlin's Wall. Thus, there is a high-stakes political conflict between Catalonia and the Spanish state. A conflict that the Catalan society wants to solve respecting two principles. First, there must be political dialogue over how can Catalonia exercise this sovereignty. And secondly, the decision must be agreed by the Catalan people through a referendum. In most democratic countries, this kind of situation will have led to a political agreement. But that's not the case in Spain. Instead of public recognition, today the leaders who organized those demonstrations with no incidents have been imprisoned, accused of sedition, a charge for which you can receive from 15 to 30 years of prison. Jordi Sánchez and Jordi Cuixart are in preventive jail without having been condemned, treated like terrorists in violation of their fundamental rights to freedom. Next week, we will celebrate 1 year in preventive jail. 1 year. I am myself today, together with all my government colleagues that helped me to organize the 1st of October referendum, accused of rebellion and risking 30 years of prison. 6 of them are still in preventive prison, as well as the president of Catalan Parliament, Carme Forcadell, and the 7 of us continue to be in exile in Scotland, in Switzerland, or in Belgium, as myself. Meanwhile, freedom of expression, freedom of information, and freedom of assembly have been curtailed, and the authoritarian drive of Spain has been recognized as a European concern. Despite of all of that, I insist that the only way to solve peacefully this conflict is dialogue. To start a negotiation with no red lines and in a climate of respect for both sides. I would like to see Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez, Spanish Prime Minister, doing the same thing. It is sad to see how he rejects once and again to talk about the right of self-determination of Catalonia. I don't know if he realizes that he will not be able to defend for much longer the old order in Spain. The Catalan people cannot be tied to a state against their own will in the 21st century. It is sad to see also that the Spanish Prime Minister has not taken steps to finish with repression. His general prosecutor, nominated by the Spanish government, still has the chance to Europeanize the standards of Spanish justice and understand that organizing a referendum cannot and should not be labeled as a rebellion or a crime of sedition. Treating a vote as an act of war seems to me the kind of things that a dictatorship will do, not a consolidated Western democracy. Prime Minister Sánchez should be aware that while there is instability and repression in Catalonia, it will be very difficult for Spain to remain politically stable. There are many reforms to do to be ready for the next economic crisis, for example, and political capital is limited. It is my advice to Prime Minister Sánchez to talk with Catalan government about a political solution and about self-determination as soon as possible. Moreover, it must be understood that political persecution has caused a real trauma in Catalan society. Perhaps you will think that in the world higher levels of violence are not to be seen in the other states. And you are absolutely right from that point of view. However, from a relative point of view, the state's anger against Catalan citizens has been extremely high. We are a modern, technological society, open to the world, that could never have suspected that this level of violence will be exerted, living in an Europe whose foundational values are freedom and democracy. Can you imagine that this will have taken place in Scotland, or in Quebec, or in the Faroe Islands? The Spanish state must leave aside anger and rage, as many Catalans want their own state, and the unity of Spain cannot be a religious principle. It's not a matter of faith, it's a matter of democracy. We want to sit down to negotiate a referendum on self-determination that is binding and internationally recognized. I have always said that it is worthwhile to do it again. If this time the other party, the one with the power of the force, Spain, accepts to participate in it and to recognize it. But otherwise, we will feel committed to the mandate of the October referendum to implement the Catalan Republic without delay. We only want what has already been done repeatedly in other cases like Scotland and Quebec. Also on November 4th, France, as my colleague has explained before, in New Caledonia, organized a referendum, France organized a referendum self-determination in New Caledonia, although for many French people that territory is an integral part of France. As a Catalan, I would like to be in another situation. Here, in the Faroe Islands, you are on the right direction. The right direction to reach a deal with Denmark for a new constitution that will respect, hopefully, your right to self-determination. Scotland made a deal with London to have an independent referendum, for independence referendum. And who knows if soon we will have a second one. And even Jacobin and centralist France has negotiated an independence referendum with New Caledonia. But at the same time, I'm happy and proud. Europe, not European institutions, but European society, is moving, step by step, little by little, but surely. Today, we, the small nations of Europe, are the forces of positive change in Europe. In the midst of a wave of authoritarian politics, we defend our right to self-determination, our right to democracy, our right to give our people a say over its own future. We shall continue, because with our efforts, we are building a better and a stronger Europe and a fairer world. In order to succeed, a globalized world needs to be based on a true sense of diversity, able to respect its minorities, to give them political power to decide their own future, to be able to define their own strategies for the future, to find their own concrete solutions for the global problems that we all need to confront. When I look into Scotland, or into New Caledonia, or into the new Faroe Islands, I don't see a problem, but a receipt for our common future, for a world common future. However, it's not only us who can make change possible. We need partners. Therefore, it is fundamental that Denmark, France, and the United Kingdom have understood that by allowing our peoples to vote, they are deepening the strength of their democracy. There is no stronger border than the one that has been ratified in the ballot boxes. Spain needs to set aside its obsession with sacred unity and leave Catalonia become an independent and friendly neighboring state. Of course, we have some difficulties today in Catalonia. And maintaining political unity is not the least of them. Repression has effects and makes the worst fears from all of us to arise. This is what we need to fight against. We need to remember that our adversary are those that use violence against ballot boxes, those that put in prison our colleagues and friends, those that legitimize the repression instead of denouncing it. Our adversary can never be those that defend self-determination or independence in a different way from ourselves, or those that want to vote against independence, because it's his right. In our internal diversity, we need to find our strength not our weakest point. I have friends in prison. I have friends in exile. Party and government colleagues, I wish they were not there, and I wish they will be immediately released. I wish they could return home tomorrow. I understand their sacrifice, and I'm grateful to them. Catalonia is the only country I know in the European Union where so many politicians are ready to pay the price for their ideas and convictions. We need to be proud about it and to keep up our peaceful right for independence and self-determination. The current structure of the Spanish state, 40 years after the approval of the Spanish Constitution, after the Franco's death, 40 years ago, the structure of the Spanish state is not able to manage the challenges we are in the frame of the fourth industrial revolution. It doesn't matter if the Prime Minister is Pedro Sánchez from the Socialist Party or Mariano Rajoy from the Popular Party. It doesn't matter. The problem lies much deeper than that. The day that this is understood outside and inside Spain, it will be easier to work towards a permanent solution. Be ready, because my colleagues in prison risk to be condemned to many years in prison for crimes that were never committed. And the Catalan people will not accept it. I expect, and I wish, that there will be a massive non-violent mobilization in defense of our rights and in support of our colleagues in jail. Many people still skeptic with independence are Democrats that cannot accept that innocent people remain so long in prison or exile. I believe in them as I believe in the more than 2 million of pro-independence citizens that have resisted the pressure to give up. There will be ups and there will be downs, but it is in the democratic dignity of our people that we'll find the seed for a better future. Always peaceful, always non-violent, but with a clear goal in our minds and hearts, self-determination, and if this is the will of the people, establishing the new Catalan Republic. Thank you very much, Magni. Thank you very much for all of you and for your questions too. And thank you very much for your attention.
I would like to, well, we now have a possibility to ask questions to Puigdemont, and I will start with one question here. Once you got some water. And that is about the people who are jailed in Spain. Mm-hmm. With this new government of Sanchez, what are the outlook for that you will have a more civilized behavior from the state versus these people? I mean, when will there be a fair trial, and what will the charges be, and what is your expectations?
Well, we decide to go to exile in order to defend our rights to have a fair trial, because that is not possible in Spain. For many reasons. First of all, because there is no separation, a clear separation of powers in Spain. The General Council of the judiciary power, the members of the Supreme Court, and the members of the Audiencia Nacional are nominated by the political majority. And the political majority always, since the first democratic elections, was in the hands of the Popular Party or in the Socialist Party, who are clearly against our right to self-determination. So, There is no guarantees. There's a lot of mistakes in that procedure. We will denounce that in the European Court of Human Rights. And I'm afraid when the trial starts, I suggest to you to follow the trial, because you will discover how Spain managed the right to have a fair trial. The policy, when we decide to support the new Prime Minister, because he has elected with our votes in the Spanish Parliament, for example, we expected the Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez will explain a new receipt for our crisis. We don't expect to see a kind of 2.0 version of the Rajoy's receipt, because it doesn't work. But after several months in power, Pedro Sánchez has shown its incapacity to explain if he has or not a project for Catalonia. And the time has finished. And probably the next weeks we will see how Pedro Sánchez loses its parliamentary support, because it's time to have an answer. Are you, Mr. Sánchez, in the same path as Mr. Rajoy, or are you trying to start a new deal with Catalonia in order to recognize that is a real problem? Trying to solve political problem through the general prosecutor, through prisons, to the penal court, is to do a very huge mistake, because it's a political and constitutional matter. It's not a crime to call for a referendum. It's not a crime to ask people its opinion, its will, their will for its future. So if the general prosecutor insists to accuse my colleagues and myself as rebels, so that means that the violent people who use guns and weapons in order to impose a political change, that is the worst way to solve that political crisis. I'm afraid that could increase the tensions between Catalonia and Spain.
Following up on that question, there was a discussion when this happened that Rajoy was a kind of covering up for his own internal political problems, and the Catalans were a sort of a minority in the Spanish kingdom, and he had an advantage with gathering more votes behind him by being very harsh towards the Catalonian. Is it the same with Sánchez?
We'll see, because Sánchez is a minority, clear minority, and we don't know when we will call for elections. Normally, the general elections, the legislative elections in Spain, will be held in 2020, but I can't remember exactly the month. We'll see. But that is a fact. We are a minority. Catalans are only 16% of the Spanish population. That is one problem, because we have no any kind of possibility to exercise a political pressure in order to promote a constitutional change. It's impossible. When, for example, several years ago, we approved in the Catalan parliament with a huge majority, including non-pro-independence party, a proposition to the Spanish parliament to allow Catalan government to call for a non-binding consultation, which is in the frame of the Spanish constitution. The majority of Spanish parties voted against that. So there is no one single possibility in the frame of the Spanish constitution to call for a non-binding consultation to the Catalan people about its future. Why? Because, yes, you are right. That kind of attitude against Catalonia has a result, has electoral results. But it's time to change that strategy, that narrative. It's not possible to have a political stability in Spain without Catalonia. without a dialogue in Catalonia. And that is clear if you look the last years. And probably after the elections, we will see the same. Because despite we are a minority, we want to do politics and we want to continue fighting for our rights. And that has effects in the reality of Spain, despite the opinion of the main parties. Yes, we are the minority, but we are the most powerful economical region in Spain. We represent more than 25.5% the Spanish exports. And we receive a third of the direct foreign investments in Spain. So we are a very powerful reality. So it's intelligent to have a good relationship with such a powerful region, not threaten, not put its leaders in jail, not follow the... There are actually 700 mayors in Catalonia, prosecuted only for its approval, because they have approved in their community a resolution supporting the 1st of October referendum. And now it's a crime. Yesterday, the Catalan parliament approved a resolution presented by the left party, which are not for independence, the left party called Catalunya en Comú, and we approved a resolution against monarchy. And yesterday, in the afternoon, on the evening, Spanish Prime Minister has said that is not acceptable, and we will present a demand in the justice against that approval. A political approval, saying we want to live in a republic. Where is a crime in that approval?
In this process that you've been through now, both with the political prisoners, but also through your referendum, we had the feeling that you were resting much upon the tradition of democracies in Western Europe, and that the European Union would come to some sort of an assistance to respect the democratic rights and the human rights. But you must have been some sort of unhappy about the response that you received so far. Can you rest upon that support in the future?
Well, I must be precise. I'm disappointed by the European Union institutions' attitude, not concerning our fighting for independence, because, of course, we expect no one single support from the states at the beginning. It was in the European tradition to say we are in the side of the Spanish state, or etc. Not about that. I was very disappointed because regarding, I don't know if you can show the videos, what you see in the beginning of the presentation, in face of such violation of fundamental rights, when police from a state member use violence against peaceful citizens, seeing that attitude, they has decided to remain silent. And then that not concerns Catalans, that concerns European citizens as a whole. Because when freedom or fundamental rights, human rights, European values are threatened in a part of the Union, that concerns the whole Union. Look the case of Poland, Hungary, Italy. I am, as a European citizen, I'm worried about the lack of commitment to fundamental rights in the rest of Europe. Because if we accept there is, for example, in Poland, no separation of powers, that affects, of course, the Spanish attitude regarding the justice. So this silence is not acceptable, because we are European citizens, and we show the best face of Europe protecting ballot boxes. Peaceful people from the old age go to votation despite all the threats, despite the violence, they go to the polling stations, and that is the best face of Europe, and the other was the worst face of Europe. So we don't expect support for our struggle for independence. We expected at that moment a support as European citizens who were hidden by a police from one member of the European Union. That is my disappointment.
Barry? Yeah, Barry Jason.
Thank you. I just want to ask you, how do you get out of this deadlock? I mean, in your lecture, you talked about you want a dialogue with the Spanish authorities, and there are no red lines, you say, but at the same time, you also refer a lot to your goal of gaining independence and establishing a republic. So I mean, what can one expect in a future dialogue? Could one expect maybe that you settle with a revised autonomy statute, for example, in line with the proposal that was overturned by the Constitutional Court in 2010, for example? Could one expect things like that, or are you very firm on independence? That's my question.
Well, in a dialogue, in the negotiation, we must have the right to expose your project. So our project is a republic. It's an independent republic. Is that the only project possible for Catalonia? Of course not. We try, for example, since 1978, after the approval of the Spanish Constitution, we try to find our role in the frame of the Spanish state. So we showed there was different ways, despite the independent way, to have a good relationship in Spain. But it's our project now to have a republic. So we expect to start a dialogue with the Spanish state, knowing what is exactly its project, because there is no one other project on the table. So it's time to know if Spain has a Spanish project for Catalonia. The time is finished. So Mr. Sanchez, or Spanish Parliament, or Spanish political system, are you some idea how to solve, in addition of the violence and repression, the political problem, or not? Because if not, we will continue for implementation of the Republic. So that means not red lines. We accept that the Spanish government goes to negotiation saying, I want to propose to you a new Statute of Autonomy. It's right. But we'll see that exactly means, because, as you remember, after the approval of the Spanish Constitution was in the beginning very open to the change. Because they say in the Article 2, the Spain is formed by regions and a new word called nationalities, a kind of synonym of nations. You are not exactly a nation, but of course you are not a region. So in that new concept, I think the legislators at that time has imagined the next generations could decline what that means in a more open point of view that they have in that moment, because we must not forget at that moment the army was watching all the democratic process, and the army was very, very close to the Franco era. So, but the problem was in the sentence in 2010, the Spanish Constitutional Court has broken that agreement, has put a line, an end, the levels and the limits, the potential of the Spanish Constitution. And that is the problem, because any kind of proposal from the Spanish government must be inside that limit. And it's a very low limit for us. So I remember a scholar, a catedrátic on constitutional law from the Sevilla University, so he's not pro-independent of Catalonia, he's not Catalan, who at that time has written an article in the El País newspaper calling that sentence as a coup d'etat, because that has finished the constitutional agreement in 1978.
Bjørn Konøy, Joshua.
Tack för det, Magne. If one looks at the events immediately prior to the elections on 1st October 2017, it appears obvious that the authorities in Madrid were not in agreement on the legality of the holding, the preparation of this referendum, this plebiscite on independence of Catalan. If we look at this from an international legal point of view, I would think that the most scholars and the international case law supports the understanding that there are only two situations in which a people has right to exercise external self-determination. One is the case of non-self-governing territories, which we have spoken about, well, you have spoken, others have spoken about earlier today. And the second case is the so-called remedial self-determination, in which there is a military occupation or where blatantly the expression of the internal self-determination is prevented by the central authorities. Now, given the position of Madrid, I wonder, it would be very enlightening to hear the position of yourself. How did you perceive this question prior to the organization of the elections? Were you of the view that you were entitled to exercise an external self-determination, or was this the fulfillment of an internal self-determination, which, though, may result in independence?
Well, you must know that in the Article 96 of the Spanish Constitution, they say clearly all the international treaties and covenants signed or ratified, by the Kingdom of Spain will be part of the internal order of Spain. In 1977, the Kingdom of Spain has ratified the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which Article 1, you have shown before. All peoples are right to self-determination. And Article 10 of the Spanish Constitution say, in case when rights recognized in that Constitution are in collision, will prevail the interpretation from the international point of view. So if you look at the current Spanish Constitution, the right of self-determination is recognized, but is not respected. That is important for us. Secondly, after the Kosovo resolution, it's clear there is no one single point in the international law against the unilateral declaration of independence. That is clear. And finally, when we are a minority, with no political capacity to change the things, we have tried all things. First, a new statute of autonomy, approved by the Catalan parliament with a huge majority. From 135 members, 120 voted yes. So it's clear and a huge majority. We approved a new text. More than 2/3 of the Spanish parliament approved it. And finally, we approved by a referendum. We tried that. We failed because the Constitutional Court suspended. Then we demand a fiscal agreement, a new deal concerning our fiscal relationship with Spain in the line, exactly in the way that Basque Country has. We failed. We received another no. After that, we demand to call for a non-binding consultation, and we received a no. After that, we proposed twice, myself in front of Spanish Prime Minister, to collaborate to organize a referendum, like in the case of the United Kingdom. I was disposed to discuss about the date, when, the question, it's only independence yes or not, or you can also propose a new deal, a new statute of autonomy, what kind of majority we need in order to apply the results, and finally, if we are agreed to resolve for a generation, despite the results, and we receive a no. So, what alternative we have? Only a remedial secession, finally. Because is the right of self-determination, for me, is a tool of peace, and is something contradictory to see how the world only respects that right after a war. And the people who has killed themselves with a violent conflict, well, they are a price to recognize its right of self-determination. That is a huge mistake. Because what about the people like Nova Caledonia, or Scotland, or Quebec, or Flanders, or Føroyar, who try to exercise the right of self-determination only with non-violent means, non-violent means? So we must be fighting about how improve and modernize the right of self-determination.
I think the next question comes from here, Jakob.
Jekvan.
I
have a question about what's the philosophy of the Spanish authorities? Is the Spanish constitution says that Spain is indivisible, but is the constitution supposed to be eternal? Is it unchanging forever? Is there no possibility of doing anything to change it sometimes in the future? And if you actually want to talk about changing the Spanish constitution, will you be thrown in jail? Will you be beaten? Will you never see the light of day again?
So for that reason, I mean the remedial secession. Because, well, you are right, the Article 2 of the Spanish Constitution, the first half say Spain is a unity and divisible nation, but continues saying Spain is formed by regional nationalities too. And if we look the literature of the right of self-determination, they always are talking about people. We, Catalonia, as recognized as a people in our Statute of Autonomy. If you look at the Spanish Constitution, they talk about the peoples of Spain. We are people. So we are a political subject. And we are right to exercise our right of self-determination. In case of contradiction, I think the right of self-determination is the tool to solve such contradiction. Because it's not against the right to unity recognized too by the Charter of United Nations. The integrity, the territorial integrity, because that right is it's only in case of attack or invasion from one country against another country, not concerns in case of the internal self-determination. Look at the case of Germany. Germany has exercised a kind of self-determination right when he unified. And by the way, that has not created one single problem for European Union. There was not a problem to join European Union in case of the internal enlargement. Is the Spanish Constitution the problem? No, really no. There are several experts, not for independence of Catalonia, who are saying that the Catalans want to know. That means if there is or not a clear majority for independence, that is perfect in the frame of the Spanish Constitution. The problem is the political will, and we will never have the possibility to change that political will, because the idea of unity of Spain is above democracy. It concerns a mystical idea. You can discuss a lot of subjects with the Spanish politicians, but once you start to discussing about the unity of Spain, there is an absolutely problem. They are not able to discuss normally about that, because it seems an idea that comes from God. And that is about democracy, human rights. It's incredible, but the problem is that the idea of unity of Spain is something sacred. And we are fighting about that, because also the idea of Catalonia is absolutely not sacred. We can discuss about all the states. So the problem is that it's a cultural problem. When I don't know if it was my last conference in Madrid with the questions open to the public, one person asked me, well, why not vote or whole Spain for independence of Catalonia? Yes, okay, why? Are you proposing that Catalonia has the right to be independent, and the only difference between you and me is if is a matter of vote for the whole of Spain or only Catalan people? And they well, no, exactly for independence. Oh wait, when I find people who say you are not enough, okay, what's enough for you? It's the case of Montenegro, for example, 55. Okay, no, it's not exactly the majority who will vote, the demos. Is the right in itself. Because finally we discover you, Catalan, you have not the right to decide your own future. And that's the problem. Because if not, we will find a solution, sure.
Rekvi Olason, a journalist from the Faroese Radio.
You partly just answered my question. You said it was a cultural issue, but I was wondering if you could elaborate on that. Why is Spain different from, I don't know, Britain or Denmark or France, for that sake, or Germany, as you mentioned yourself? Could you? This is probably a long story, maybe, but you could shorten it a little bit. What are the cultural or historical contexts that make Spain react in a violent way? And question number two: did you, before you started this process, did you expect Spain, the Spanish state, to react in that way? So were you conscious of the fact that this might actually be the result, that you would have a violent reaction and you would end up in exile yourself? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. Well, I'm not an expert in history, but I will try to answer shortly your first question. In fact, the big change in the Iberian or Spanish monarchy was in the beginning of the 18th century, when after the war of succession entered the Bourbon dynasty from France. Till that time, the kings come from the Austro-Hungarian dynasty, more confederate. And by the way, the name of the king, the first king, was Felipe II, Felipe V, and now we are under the Felipe VI. So Felipe V has approved a new plant decree and banned the Catalan language, the Catalan institution, Catalan constitution, and start a very centralized, like in the French model, administration that still are in service, in fact. So what is one of the problems? The construction of the centralized monarchy and the centralized state. And we, Catalonia, we defend the other candidate to the crown and we lose, and we receive the consequences of our defeat. So we must wait till 1931 in the Second Spanish Republic to restore our parliament, our government, our right to self-government. And for a short time, because as you know, in 1939 starts the Franco's dictatorship, who has again banned Catalan language, Catalan institutions, etc., and executed my predecessor, the former Catalan president, who also was in exile in France, was extradited by the Germans at that time to the Spanish regime and was executed in 1940 in Barcelona. So I think it was, as you know, a big empire, and to be a big empire, to need that to be strong in the use of military power. So I think that is one of the origins of our crash of attitudes concerning how to manage the rights, the fundamental rights. The second question, you asked me about if I expect that kind of reaction. Well, in fact, not as we have seen. Because we believe, I believe, and we generally believe, after 40 years of democracy, to be part of the European Union, to use the European rule of law, and to protect, rhetorically, the human rights, there is a new political generation in Spain who, despite its opposition to an independent Catalonia, which is perfectly democratic, despite that, they will accept to solve a problem through the dialogue. And we were wrong, because there has no one single problem to use violence in front of international media. No one single problem. Like when CNN, Al Jazeera are broadcasting when I must go to vote, they start to hit the people. And we, of course, in that sense, we didn't expect that kind of reaction. We expect a reaction as till the 1st of October, from the 1st of October till 10th of October, I received in a kind of, not exactly back channel, but in our relationship with the Spanish government. They say, okay, I understand, the 1st of October, change the things, we must talk, it's possible to allow a window of dialogue. You has won, but you were not enough, etc., etc., etc. We start that. That was a joke, because they has 1 week after our first declaration of independence, they had a start of a huge repression, and the Jordis were put in jail.
Are we going to give this man an applause?
Thank you.
Kenneth. Thank you. This is the final session, and we are about to round up this event. But Mr. Puigdemont, there was one question you didn't answer.
Barça.
How do you pronounce your name?
Okay. Puigdemont. Puigdemont.
Excuse me.
That's for Höckner, that's for Höckner.
It means the right of the people.
Yes, sorry. Yeah. Well, we will have 2 short questions here in the end before we are rounding up. And one of the questions is where we actually started. I mean, we've been through this evolution of the right to self-determination over the last 100 years, and we have seen a change in attitude and how the arguments are going forwards and backwards. What can we do to modernize this idea of the self-determination in the 21st century to support nations like those that you are representing? Carlos?
Well, I have an idea. Forget the glasses from the 20th century and change for the new glasses to look for the 21st century. Because nothing that has able to manage the challenges from the 20th centuries is useful or is able to help us to solve the new challenges. Nothing to do with colonialism in general, nothing to do with fighting against dictatorship or wars. It concerns democracy, fundamental rights, and the new empowerment of the citizens. We are under the effects of the 4th Industrial Revolution and the new digital revolution that put in your hands more power than has society in the whole humanity. With that single tool, you have more power than 50 years ago if you have a gun. That is more powerful. And that is in your hand. It's quite, it's unbelievable. The governments in the 21st century don't use that in order to improve our society, in order to achieve our challenges, fighting against the climate change, to protect human rights, etc. And that is very linked in the basis on how we must look today to the right of self-determination.
Høgni Hørdal.
Well, I fully agree with Carlos. It's about the concept of democracy and the way forward. And you mentioned, Magne, a fourth step or a fourth period in the history of mankind regarding human rights, regarding nations' rights, and so on. So I fully agree that we have to work together, also in all international forums, to exercise the rights to democracy and to decide for ourselves, also with a diversity of nations. Because I still believe that the glasses Carlos mentioned, the glasses of the old nation states, we often hear this, that when you struggle for independence, you are nationalists in a negative sense. But actually, I believe that the biggest obstacle for a democratic and prosperous world is the nationalism of the old nation states, preventing rights to peoples which they self-claim is the basis of their ideals and so on. And we have seen that now in Europe. And I must, of course, claim that I'm also shocked and upheld by what I see in Spain, and also the reaction from Europe. Because even though European states will not support Catalanian independence, that they do not protest against the violence and the violation and the imprisonment of democratic people, that's quite a shock. And we of course support you in that. And I believe it's still the question of the power of the old nation states, because even though it's not similar in all our countries what has happened, but we also saw in the Faroe Islands that this question of using legality or legal power to oppress political process we have seen. Our referendum in 1946 was not acknowledged because it was pro-independence, but I'm sure it had been acknowledged if it was against independence. And I believe so also. If the referendum in Catalonia would have been against independence, then the European institutions would say, well, now we protest against these harsh powers of the Spanish state, because now it's not difficult because you have voted against independence, so now we can say it without the fright of this leading to problems in our own countries. I think that's the question. So the way forward is to acknowledge that also international bodies have to recognize the real impact of self-determination and the rights of peoples to choose their own path.
Yeah, well, they say there's 57 varieties of socialism, and I think it's about the same with nationalism. You have ethnic nationalism and imperialism at one extent, and then you've got the kind of civic nationalism that we all support, which is not ethnically based and not prejudicial or discriminatory, but is inclusive nationalism based on human rights, and that clearly has to be the way forward. But let's think about where we've come in the last 100 years. 100 years ago, we were all, my grandfather was actually gassed in the trenches almost 100 years ago this month, and at 18 years old, and survived only till he was in his mid-30s. The Great War was coming to an end, and think of how Europe looked. Poland, a nation, a vibrant nation now of 40 million people, was divided between the empires of Russia, Germany and Austria-Hungary. And yet, you know, look how things have changed dramatically. Czechoslovakia broke away from Austro-Hungary, and then in 1989 with the Velvet Divorce with Slovakia and the Czech Republic. Incidentally, there was not a majority in either the Czech or Slovak lands for that. The Slovak National Council just declared it. But now 90% of people on both sides believe it's a great success, and it has been a tremendous success. One of the inspirational things in my life, I think, was just after the fall of the Berlin Wall, when the Latvians, the Lithuanians and Estonians had been ferociously repressed by Soviet communism with mass colonization, etc., deportations to Siberia, you name it, formed a human chain across their three countries, and they soon declared independence. As someone had said 30 years ago, by the way, in 3 years, Latvia, Lithuania and Estonia will be independent, the Soviet Union will fall, and people would have thought you were mad. So things can happen very rapidly in politics, and things can change. What you need is to have hope. What you have to always to do is to be positive, and what you have to do is continue dialogue and to promote your vision. And repression never works in the long run. You know, Mahatma Gandhi managed to create an independent India that umpteen rebellions failed to achieve in the 190 years prior to that. So I believe there's great hope. There's a lot of talk, a lot of discussion still to go on, but the position of the Spanish state cannot hold indefinitely. And Catalonia and the people of Catalonia will have its opportunity, I believe, sooner rather than later to have a decision on whether it becomes an independent state. And I think they will vote yes.
Yeah,
and the Faroes too.
Daniel Goa.
La question elle est très bonne. Que peut-on faire aujourd'hui pour continuer à se renforcer à travers les actions et les organisations que nous menons?
Hva kan man gjøre i det for å lykkes med å styrke akkurat støv og gjøre noen til arbeid vi gjør og gjøre imiske stålner og fellesskaper?
Parce que la question qui est posée, elle est posée à l'humanité. Quel sens ça a aujourd'hui de continuer à maintenir des rapports de domination dans un monde globalisé?
Hvorfor er mening gjør det nå, fra nå av, at holde fast ved at undertrykke og gjøre noen alt kjører hjemme?
Et je pense que cette question nous concerne là, nous en premier lieu, mais elle concerne surtout les pays qui nous dominent.
Dette en spørning som relevant for oss her, men særlig for de landene som råder i oss.
Il va donc falloir que nous tissions des relations un peu plus renforcées entre les pays qui sont en demande d'indépendance.
Og det er at vi skulle styrke samfunnet i oss midtelen vid landene som ber fullvelde, oss midtelen.
Et pourquoi ne pas proposer un acte qui confirmerait le travail que nous venons de faire là pendant ces 2 ou 3 jours ici, qui donnerait une impulsion à la politique que chacun de nous mène ici.
Og hvor ikke holde frem ved tøylykken arbeid som gjørs til seg tragediene at vise av, og som for at så eller så avvirke politiske skipene her som vi der.
Ce sera la petite contribution de mon équipe là pour faire cette proposition.
Og dette vil så akkurat utkast fra munnen til å ta med her.
Merci.
I have one final question for Kenneth and Høgnen. You are both representing European countries and Western democracy and states who respect law. What do you think? How could you, I know that you don't accept what we are seeing here on this poster. And seeing the violence and the jailing of people who have conducted democratic political processes in Catalonia. What is your view upon it, and how can Europe and how can you as a part of the European Union, we as outside the European Union, help in creating a better solution than we are seeing today and helping in solving the problem? Or can we do anything? Do we just have to accept it? Kenneth first.
Well, I don't think we accept anything that's a breach of human rights. I think what we have to do is we have to lobby the Spanish state. We have to support our Catalan brothers and sisters. And I think we have to support human rights wherever they are violated. But I think that there is an opportunity in Catalonia to move forward because, you know, it was pointed out earlier by Carlos, but that the Spanish government is unstable. They will need Catalan votes for certain legislative processes, or the government might actually fall. In Spain, the one thing Spain is completely fed up with would be yet another all-Spanish election process. So there's a window of opportunity there, there's a chink there, but we have to make it clear that Spain's long-term reputation is continuing to be soiled by what is happening in Catalonia. Spain said to the rest of Europe once Franco died that that was a chapter in their history that was consigned to the dustbin. It's not been consigned to the dustbin, as we can clearly see. The deep Spanish state still has strong repressive tendencies, but we have to work collectively to support the Catalans in working against that. Ultimately, it's up to people themselves to decide their own future and not have their future decided by others.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes. Well, we as parliamentarians, political parties, and governments of Europe, even though we are not part of the European Union, we can of course raise this question in all the fora that we participate in, because I think that's the only thing that will put pressure on Spain if this also becomes a shame for the European countries that they are not protesting. And one thing we could do is for instance, in the Nordic Council, to try to raise this question. There are members of the EU and also members outside the EU. I think that's the only, or that's the most concrete step that we could take from the Faroe Islands. And also this conference and what you have done in this matter, Magda, is also part of lifting this into light, because if it's forgotten or suppressed also in the press and the European press, I think nothing will happen. So I think our commitment will be that we will raise it in all the international fora that we are part of course.
Can I just add, you should go on holiday to Catalonia and not to Andalusia next summer.
Yeah, why not?
Because economic, in all seriousness, you know, these things are important. I mean, economic pressure is always important.
Do you have a comment here by the end?
Yes, only two things that I forgot to say. First, our problem is with the Spanish state, not with the Spanish population.
Of course.
We have nothing against Spain, nothing against Spaniards or Spanish culture or Spanish products. We are friends, and we want to continue to be friends, and we are very good. We want to have a very good relationship with Spain. So that is clear. And second, I want to thank all of you who are wearing a yellow ribbon, because that shows solidarity to the human rights. You must know wear a yellow ribbon in Catalonia now is a risk. You can confront some groups, a kind of guerrilla masked with knives, trying to remove all the yellow ribbons in the streets. Also, in the people who are wearing that yellow ribbon. So I will send to my colleagues in jail your commitment to freedom and to democracy and to peace. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to an end on this conference. Høgni Hoydal will have a short roundup, but before you are leaving the scene, I'm just telling you that tomorrow at 5 o'clock, in line with what you were saying now, there will be a cultural event at Finsen, kommunskolan, and it's called Catalonia Ord og Tónar. Hva var det så det? Catalonia Finsen, og så det Ord, Tónar og Brunalia. Det som 4 ganger her faktisk har vi noe av tónlegging, Farida for å spille, det var jo her.
Nei.
Vil du høre meg noe av det? Ok. Da vi med annet Farida for å synge, og her blir noe av tónlegging, og da Jakobsen for å spille, altså med gitarre ur Barcelona, Eion for å synge, og her for Ulla Sjøvel, de har greia fra til det våre nye Catalonia, fra 1. oktober i fjør, og Robert Thomasen som har en lytla framløve om vi Føroyar våre i Barcelona og handelsstevne i 1930 og vunnet gullmedaljene, og de skulle eisne råkne vi at Carlos Puigdemont var her. Men det var meira av kultursøyne og kanskje eisne av mannarappningarsøyne, den tøyden som var i Finsen og i Mørk.
Nu har vi skulle fara klappa för kan man fyra så vi är så rövnar fram då för oss. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, I will not prolong this for many more minutes, but I would also like to thank you all, Daniel and Carlos and Kenneth, for your participation in all your delegations. Also thank you to Magni and his staff, and to our political party, and to Hanna Jensen, who has translated, and to the staff here in the Nordic House for arranging this conference. And I think that it has been prosperous, and as Carlos, you concluded with, the struggle for independence is not against other people. It's a tool to cooperation, and also, in our opinion, a tool to, or the prerequisite for a peaceful and better world. And when Magni asked what should be done internationally, we are working very much with these new 7 Sustainable Development Goals of the UN. Perhaps there should be an 18th called Political and Democratic Sustainable Development, where we also add the rights for also these nations that are not a state yet or a republic yet to preserve their own destination. So with those words, I thank you very much and hope that we will meet soon again. And I look forward also to meet tomorrow. So thank you very much. Tack för att ni kom och allt det bästa framöver.